Oh my God, your boy often says that this is the worst wrestling has been, but it is true. Every single pay-per-view or WWE special event, whatever the hell they call them now, this reality gets reinforced again and again. And Extreme Rules 2022 was absolutely no different. Now, for the sake of the fact that we're talking about it, we'll go over what happened in the sense like who won and who lost. We're not going to waste too much time on it because there's a lot of other things to talk about with respect to this horrible, horrible event. First up, the Brawling Brutes, Sheamus, Butch, and Ridge Holland beat Imperium. Both of these teams are teams that have some sort of future. There is a point where someone has to tell the truth like it is about people like Sheamus. Sheamus is continuously reinventing himself. People thought this guy was going to be done 10 years ago, and he's out there still having good matches and still being quasi-relevant, right? Now, it's the time of other wrestlers like Drew McIntyre, but the reality is what the reality is. Sheamus rules, and he always really has, Like, I'm coming around on Sheamus. Butch, way better than Pete Dunne. Way, way better. People are like, oh, why did he change his name? Gee, maybe because Pete Dunne sucks and he's a boring-ass midget, you know what I'm saying? And Butch is also a boring-ass midget, but he's a boring-ass midget with an anger problem who's connected to two bigger guys and it fits. It's almost like DX when they had China, right? It's like one of these three doesn't fit, you know what I mean? But that's what makes it work. Imperium, obviously, like, they're good. They're nothing special. They're nothing great, but I like it. Like, they're obviously trying to work a gimmick. And that's all I can ask from wrestlers nowadays. Because nowadays, we're inundated with horrible garbage, right? And when I say work a gimmick, I mean a gimmick that actually is logical, makes sense, and it's conducive to the personalities that are working it, right? These are serious Germanic Europeans, right? Oh, but Giovanni Vinci is Italian. Yeah, but he's Fabian Eichner, right? He's obviously one of those Germanic, Northern Swiss Italian types. So it doesn't really matter, right? Point being, these guys, they have a character and it makes sense from who they are, right? They look the part, everything makes sense. Next up, we had Ronda Rousey beating Liv Morgan, who gives a rat's ass. I can't believe Ronda Rousey's still in WWE after her WrestleMania debut, you know what I mean? Or whatever, WrestleMania return. Even from her debut, I can't believe she's still there, period, right? It's like, what the hell's this bitch doing there? You know what I'm saying? But the reality is what the reality is. She is, and she wins. Who cares? Next up, we have a horrible, boring match. Karrion Kross versus Drew McIntyre. The Karrion Kross Experiment 2.0 is going to fail just like the first one did. It's only a matter of time. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just a complete waste of time. Now, I'm not saying that Drew McIntyre is this guy that you can bury Drew McIntyre by having him lose to Karrion Kross, because Drew McIntyre sucks too. I mean, he's more entertaining than Karrion Kross, obviously, but he's not it didn't really work out for him either, you know what I mean? He had one of those title runs where he's a main eventer, then all of a sudden he's shuffled back to the mid-card. But he does have some star power as a result of the fact that he was a main eventer for a long time, right? For at least a year, right? So as a byproduct of that, Drew McIntyre can be plugged into something like Clash at the Castle, and it makes sense. You can't plug in someone like Karrion Kross there. It would be like that time when they had R-Truth challenge Cena for the world title, and all of a sudden R-Truth's a main eventer for one day, and then he's a mid-carder once again, and then he's a jobber, right? So I didn't really particularly like that. Bianca Belair beats Bayley. Who gives a damn? You know what I mean? At this point, the women's division has only one purpose. Basically, just continue to just waste time until WrestleMania, where they try to make another star, right? It didn't really work, in my opinion, with Bianca Belair, but they're going hard on her. I don't think she has what it takes. I think she's boring. I think she doesn't show enough of her personality, which might be the saving grace. But that's the choice they made, so they get. Then we have Finn Balor versus Edge in an I Quit match. I actually enjoyed this a little bit, but only because of the fact that the match wasn't really Finn Balor versus Edge. It was basically Judgment Day versus Edge and Beth Phoenix, right? The entire match was presented as, can Edge destroy Judgment Day by himself, right? That's what the story that was being told here. And the answer was a resounding no if we are to go by the results of this match, right? And that's the point. The point is Edge is going to need some help. Now, who's he going to get help from? Okay, obviously Beth Phoenix. I'm sure Rey Mysterio is going to be involved at some point, but the reality is that he needs help. And that's the next point in the storyline, right? That's the next logical point. So this match was good because it advanced that point. There was a reason for it happening, right? Then we had a completely meaningless Matt Riddle-Seth Rollins match. Now, I will say one thing and one thing only. Seth Rollins, as well as Matt Riddle to a lesser extent, are pretty much carrying this company, right? They're carrying the Raw brand at least, that's for sure, right? They're carrying WWE, if we're being honest, right? Because Seth Rollins and Matt Riddle Wait, what did I say? Whatever. Point being, they're carrying WWE, and the reason why that is this, right? They keep being plugged into these main event matches while Roman Reigns, the double champion, doesn't do anything, right? We don't even have the Usos in this pay-per-view, right? So it's like you have all these championships in one faction, and the faction doesn't show up. Remember when DX had Triple H as the champion, and then the New Age Outlaws as the tag team champions? He'd come out every week, basically saying how like they control everything, and they would like rub it in people's faces, right? Now, Roman Reigns and the Usos do that, right? But then they don't show up on pay-per-views, right? Which is like where you want to see them, you know what I mean? But I don't want to harp on that too much because we've talked about that before. Matt Riddle and Seth Rollins, once again, they keep carrying the company by being these like spontaneous main eventers. You know, now that Orton is gone for like a while, now that pretty much Roman Reigns is gone, I know he's around, but he really isn't. Cocky Rhodes was in the Matt Riddle position before, but obviously he's unreliable because he got injured, so they just plugged in Matt Riddle there. But basically, since WrestleMania, Seth Rollins has pretty much carried the WWE on his back, right? He's the only one who's like good enough and has this quasi, superstar appeal in the sense that he's been a main eventer for a long time, right? He's the only one that's like that and that is still there consistently, right? In this card, he's the only legit main eventer other than Edge, right? And obviously Edge has an asterisk next to his name because Edge is a main eventer by virtue of the fact that he's a legend, right? Like this recent run, Edge is not a main eventer. He's basically a mid-carder if we're being straight, right? He's wrestling, at the end of the day, he's wrestling Finn Balor, who last year was in NXT. So, you know what I mean? Enough said. Now, aside from the fact that Karrion Kross got a win over Drew McIntyre in a completely meaningless 10-minute match, right? Aside from that being a complete mistake, a complete misfire by the booking department, right? The other noteworthy thing that we're going to talk about here is, of course, the return of the cuckold Bray Wyatt, right? Now, Bray Wyatt came out. It was lame. Now, we didn't really get to see him much, but from what I saw, he looked fatter than ever, right? One of the only saving graces of him becoming the Fiend and like the Funhouse Bray Wyatt was the fact that he wasn't as fat anymore, right? Do the muscle man dance, right? Like he was getting himself in shape, right? He was like at least trying to make himself look more badass. Now, based upon only his face, he was just more bulbous than he's ever been. You know what I mean? Now, maybe that's wrong. Maybe, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But the reality speaks for itself. Who the hell cares that Bray Wyatt is back? Like, I know he got a reaction, but WWE will react to anything. And the WWE audience will react to anything as well, as will the AEW audience, right? I mean, we live in a time now when CM Punk coming back does not yield excitement and cheering. It yields actual emotions. People start crying, right? So the fact that someone gets a pop doesn't mean anything anymore. People pop for the wrong thing all the time. If you took out Kevin Owens for a year and brought him back, he'd also get a huge pop. Right? There's nothing special about any of these guys, right? In fact, this proves it, in my opinion. This proves it, right? It's like all you need to do nowadays, and this started, I would argue with like Drew McIntyre, that's all you need to do, is you need to fire someone, they need to go away for a while, and then you can just bring them back and then repackage them as whatever you want. You can repackage them as a main eventer, as a mid-carder, as a jobber, whatever you want. You can do whatever you want, right? And that's the problem. That's not good. That's not a good thing. The fact that the last time we saw Bray Wyatt, he was getting humiliated by Alexa Bliss and RKO'd, losing a WrestleMania opening match in like 2 minutes to Orton, right? The fact that that's the last time we saw him tells you all you need to know about Bray Wyatt as a character, right? He was so buried, right, that he had to be fired. And now you can bring him back and pretend he's a badass, right? Because the WWE universe and WWE fans have a very short-term memory, so they look at it, they're like, yeah, that badass guy is back. They forget that badass guy is the same guy that was having a Scooby-Doo match with Matt Hardy and getting his ass beat every couple of years by Randy Orton, an alpha male compared to him. You know what I'm saying? And that's the problem that I have with this, right? The fact that Bray Wyatt is back should not concern anyone in kayfabe, right? We have to look at this from a kayfabe perspective, right? Who gives it? Why the hell would Randy Orton care if Bray Wyatt is back? Randy Orton's beating his ass for 10 years. He's going to beat his ass for another 10. Big deal. You know what I mean? Why the hell would someone like Roman Reigns or hell, even Solo Sikoa care that Bray Wyatt is back? Solo Sikoa, his entire character is like he's like the champion of the streets. He doesn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? He's there to beat your ass, right? Why would he care because some fat goof comes out with a lantern that he turns off with a switch and pretends he blows on it? You know what I mean? You have to have some sort of parity between, the wrestling characters, right, and the storylines in which you place them in. It's as simple as that. Like back in the day, there were no badasses, right? The only badass was like Ken Shamrock, right? In the Attitude Era. Ken Shamrock. Everyone else was kind of a goof. And Ken Shamrock also was a goof because his gimmick was that he's like this overly serious, guy, and it became almost comical, right? He like hit his own head and like, do crazy shit. That was the whole point. All the serious wrestlers were presented as jobbers. Like Steve Blackman was a serious wrestler, but he was a jobber, right? Everyone had any kind of standing, ranging from like Al Snow to like Big Boss Man, Val Venus, Goldust back in the day, Stone Cold, The Rock. All of them had elements of comedy in there, right? So, and if they didn't, they behaved consistently with their character. So, for example, Triple H was the Game, right? Like, he was like a cowardly heel, right? But he was still a badass. So when Triple H would attack Undertaker, he wouldn't worry about Undertaker, manifesting lightning to strike Triple H. No, he doesn't care. He's Triple H. He's the boss, basically, right? So that's how the wrestling should work. Nowadays, you have all these wrestlers that are basically comedy characters, like Bray Wyatt at this point is a comedy character, Ramblin' Rabbit, motherfucks. He's a comedy character. He comes out, and it's like, why would a serious character, like, I understand, for example, why Matt Riddle might be scared of Bray Wyatt, because Matt Riddle is a comedy character. But why the hell would Solo Sikoa or Roman Reigns be afraid of Bray Wyatt? Why the hell would Braun Strowman ever be afraid of Bray Wyatt, right? And if they're not afraid of him, what the hell's the point? The entire premise is that Bray Wyatt is like a psychological, guy who plays mind games, and he wins as a result of that. Because there's no way in hell you're going to convince me that fat Bray Wyatt is ever going to be able to beat up like Ridge Holland or worse, Braun Strowman, right? It's just ridiculous. It's just stupid. So you have to have things make sense. You know what I mean? You can't have Braun Strowman be this serious guy, right? Who's out there just destroying people, and then he's afraid of Finn Balor? No, it doesn't make any sense, right? So Bray Wyatt returning, in my opinion, is a complete waste of time. It's not going to lead to anything. Now, will it lead to a possible title run 5 years from now? Maybe. You know what I'm saying? But will that title run have any meaning or be a success of any kind? The answer is absolutely not. As a matter of fact, when Roman Reigns drops the belt to I don't know who at this point, I mean, I can only guess it's going to be Cookie Rhodes. There's no one else that like even remotely has enough hype behind them, right? Maybe Braun Breaker, who knows, right? But when Roman Reigns drops the title in the far future, in like a year and a half from now probably, right? When he drops the title, the ratings are going to plummet, right? They're going to plummet. Unless when Roman Reigns drops the title, he comes out on Raw the next day and he says, I want a rematch. But probably, more likely than not, what's going to happen is WWE's going to follow this new-ass formula. Roman Reigns is going to lose his title eventually at either this WrestleMania or probably, in my opinion, the next WrestleMania, because this WrestleMania they're saying he might wrestle The Rock, and The Rock's not beating him for the title, right? That's not the point. So if Roman Reigns beats The Rock, and then he holds it to the next WrestleMania after this, and he drops it to, let's say, Braun Breaker or something, right? Or someone else that's becoming a big deal, then you know for a fact that Roman Reigns is not going to show up to Raw the next day. He's going to be gone for 6 months and show up at like SummerSlam at the earliest. Most likely at Survivor Series or maybe even the Royal Rumble. Because you know for a fact, motherfuckers, you know for a fact that if Roman Reigns is staying with the company, if he's staying with the company, he will drop the title eventually, and then when he drops the title, he's going to come back as the bloodline's going to be over, obviously. He's going to come back as a face. He's going to win the Royal Rumble, maybe entering at number 1. He's going to win the Rumble, or he's going to come in as a surprise at the Rumble, probably. He's going to win the Rumble, and he's going to win the title back at the next WrestleMania. This is almost a guarantee. You know what I mean? The only way this doesn't happen is if Roman Reigns leaves the company, right? So, you do see the problem with that? It's the same thing as Bray Wyatt. It's like the only way you can get excitement out of your wrestlers is if you get rid of them for 400 days. Bray Wyatt's gone for like over a year, and people are like, Bray Wyatt's back. Like, it's going to be, I hope he gets booked right this time. What do you mean you hope he gets booked right? How is he booked wrong? He was booked right the whole time. He was booked as a monster heel who just never got over. And then eventually what would happen is this. They would build him up by having him beat people like fucking Daniel Bryan, like, these B-list wrestlers, right? And they're like, who cares? He can beat Daniel Bryan, it's fine. He can beat Seth Rollins, it's fine. Then eventually the point would come where it'd be like, all right, time to like see if we can elevate him to the main event. Who are we going to put him up against? Let's put him up against one of our real main eventers like Cena or Roman Reigns, right? Or in his case, Randy Orton, right? And what would happen is this. Someone would go to Vince or Triple H and they'd say, we're going to have a match. It's going to be Bray Wyatt and Orton, right? Who should go over? And everybody who knows anything would basically say that the only person that deserves to go over would definitely have to be, obviously, Randy Orton, right? Why? Very simple. It's very simple, right? Because Randy Orton is Randy Orton, and Bray Wyatt looks like Bray Wyatt, and he has the Bray Wyatt gimmick. So there's no other way around it. You know what I mean? No one else can win, right, with this kind of character in the mix, right? Now, like, What's he gonna do? Probably go after Braun Strowman. Who cares? The point is, he's doing exactly what the smarks and the marks have been complaining about for decades, right? Which is he's taking spot from talent that otherwise deserves it more. Because there's no argument that anyone can make that would convince me that Bray Wyatt deserves a push or deserves to even come back, right? He deserves none of these things. He is not good enough to come back, and he's not good enough, quite frankly, to be a main eventer, right? The character has been besmirched and defiled too much. It's not feasible for him to come back. And in my personal opinion, nobody should really want him to come back. Aside from the nostalgia and the fact that people, for some reason, really like Bray Wyatt, even though he sucks, right? Aside from these inexplicable factors, there's no reason to look forward to this, right? What match are people looking forward to? What developments have happened in the last 400 years of WWE where now it's like, well, Bray Wyatt is back. Like, we're going to see a great match between him and who? And who? Who's he going to have a good match with? You know what I mean? It's either going to be people that he already wrestled, or it's going to be jobbers that nobody cares about, right? Versus compare and contrast when, for example, Kurt Angle left WWE for TNA, right? You could think off the top of my head right now, I can think of like 10 matches, right, that were like not dream matches, but if they happened today, they'd be considered dream matches. First of all, we had Kurt Angle, Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle, AJ Styles, Kurt Angle, Daniels, Kurt Angle versus Sting, remember him? Kurt Angle versus Jeff Jarrett, a lot of people wanted to see that, especially after everything that happened, right? Then there was other things, like, other like, not dream matches, but things that would be interesting, like Kurt Angle versus Abyss. People were talking about that. They want to see that happen. They want to see how that unfolds, right? And then you had other wrestlers, that's 6 already, right? You had other things, like people saying, like, yeah, it'd be great to see, like, a real match, like a real long match between Kurt and Christian Cage. I was one of those people, right? A lot of people saying things like, well, it'd be great if Kurt Angle put over, like, a real talent, like Kazarian or Jay Lethal at the time, right? There was a lot of these types of things that people were looking forward to, right? Even seeing Kurt Angle versus Booker T again, right? Things that we hadn't seen in years, right? And that never really got that big payoff in WWE. But with Bray Wyatt, there's none of those things. There's none of those things. If there was another creepy heel, like if he showed up at NXT and attacked Joe Gacy, all right, fine. That'd be a little bit interesting, right? I mean, obviously it wouldn't be, but it'd be more interesting than him showing up and attacking. He's probably going to go after like Braun Strowman, or if Drew McIntyre is not busy, he's going to go after Drew McIntyre. You know what I mean? Nothing is going to come of this, right? Nothing good is going to come of this, and people need to understand this. And once they do, and once they realize that once again the hater, your boy, was right, then they're going to realize absolutely nothing. This cycle will repeat itself for years, motherfuckers, for years. And this is why the hater needs to move to other topics just that go beyond wrestling, because, we can't just talk about the same shit again and again, cuckolds. And with that, go fuck your mothers and see you later, bitches.